I'm Andy at Patchwerks. You may have heard me from such projects as Auric Lear, Fathom the Void, and Cleavy Vostum. And here to talk about noise and feedback patching. What I decided to do, I call it the foundation of the track. The bass, the wobbly parts, I found when playing live that it was the best part I could zone in on and focus on. So I kind of do it every time, and I decided for this patch to use the Yomox T Rackinizer. It's a filter matrix with a ton of feedback options, envelope, stereo, mixing, delay, all that stuff's in there, parameter changes. And I decided to put it into the Sloppy Engineering 100 grit and come down into the Quadrat. And I did that in a attenuverter mode so that I could nudge the feedback in different directions. Just adds a little bit more dynamic. And I also use that for the 100 grid as well. So when I use the touch points or twist stuff, there's not a huge effect, but it's a very subtle nudge in the feedback path itself. And after that, I go into Data Bender here, set up like this. And I kind of just let it go and just kind of mangle it and do its thing. The other half of the patch for the foundation part is the Exile Wreckage here. It's just a triple square wave drone with artifact generator. It's just a power electronics harsh noise machine. And I sent that into the high gain from Snazzy FX that's feedback patched. So feedback is patching it into itself. This has normalization in 1 and 2. So I send that through, and on the mix out, go into the nonlinear circuits Mobius pill. And this takes a mono signal, throws it between 2 low pass gates that are controllable here with an internal VCO that kind of bounce it back and forth, gives it kind of a natural reverb sound while also making it a little darker. And that's just going into Desmodus Versio. And that's just straight out. And so those are the two parts for that. Down here in Vortices, I have the Data Bender going into 1. I have the Desmodus going into Xpan, which is going into 3 here. And that is being modulated from 2 LFOs from Oct through mutes, so I could toggle it on and off. That adds stereo width and everything. And I fed back vortices into stereo channel 2. That adds a saturation and colorization and adds a little bit more oomph and thickness to the signals being presented in the stereo channel. So there's just that little bit extra, not going too overboard with it. And that was the foundation part. The rest of it is just straight mono channels. I have a Trogotronic 669, which is another triple oscillator artifact generator module. Just another harsh noise machine. It's a little bit tamer than Wreckage, but it's still one of my favorites. Let me redo that. So 669 is going to channel 3 of high gain. High gain is just going straight into the channel 2 of my 4MS Listen 4. That's just a little bit extra noise to add to it. It's very tunable once you get to know it. The interesting parts for me are Interstellar Radio. Eric Sloppy revealed pretty early in its release that if you go error out into signal in, you get a kind of a chaotic noise source. What I've done is patched it more from the demodulator and the carrier sections to make it even more chaotic and more insane. I have used it for pretty much 80% of my recordings, live play. It's one of my go-tos. It's just been like this for about 2.5 years. Okay. The Interstellar Radio is going into Mystic Circuits Portal. I have one of the black ones that were out. And I'm using the wrap out after the distortion to go into the After Later Audio Juggler V2. This was the last iteration of it before it was discontinued. And what I love about this guy right here is that it takes incoming signals, and as you turn up frequency of the filter and the juggle function of the filter, it starts to intersplice the audio going in while it juggles it around with the oscillators that are in it. And it just creates a little more chaos and confusion. That is going into Animal Factory Coma Reactor, which is probably my favorite delay. There's a bandpass filter, it's really noisy. You have sidechain, and I have it sidechained into a nonlinear circuits digital filter simulator. And what it is, if you haven't heard of it, is a all analog circuit using shift registers to poorly model a digital filter, hence a digital filter simulator. And that is going back in to here. That's the only sidechain part, and that's going straight out into vortices. So that's channel 1. Channel 2, I just have the left out. The L out just fed right back into mono number 2. And I finally have the R going out of here through the Tom Whitwell version of the Benjamin. Kind of doing the same thing here, it's just not as elegant. As you heard, a lot of the screeches and pops and everything were actually from this with the Rungler filter. And that is going back into vortices. And I have another out of it molted here going into channel 1 of the 4MS. That's just to add, again, just another layer, another little bit of oomph, thicken it up just a little bit more. One of the things with the Yomox Rackinizer is that as you adjust the feedback, you can get the deep bass that you hear, and you can get the classic feedback squeals and trails and everything. I have right here, I'm modulating feedback with the Sound Machine's light plane, where it's just a touch controller, where you get to go on 3 axes if you want. I'm using 2, and you get to turn it up. And you can set levels wherever you want, or you can record patterns. And it'll just go forever, and you can interrupt it with taps, and then it'll keep going. This is another thing I've used live a lot, and I've used everywhere else. For this patch, I am at the end of an album cycle, and it's been pretty publicized on my Instagram and stuff, but I'm going through a withdrawal from a medication, and I decided to create an album in it. This is the patch at the last track of my new album, and I was going for a sound of like things are starting to come back together, but things are uncertain, or like a kind of a creeping doom, if you will, or like a creeping sense of unease, not really knowing what's to come. And I think I got it pretty good. There's a lot of loud things, there's a lot of quiet things, there's a lot of deep things, and it just kind of, I patched this album all on feel and what sounds right in the moment. And this is what sounded right in the moment to close it out. So I went with it. And I tried some new things. I haven't really used the 100 grit more as a background guy. It's usually been foreground. It's usually been like, look at my distortion, look at what I can do. So to flip it and have it just be kind of a nudging tool was an interesting thing. Another thing from vortices I have is I have MOX1 going to channel 2 of the digital filter simulator. And 2 out is going into channel 3 of the Quadrat. It's the same thing as the Yomox, where I have it on the attenuator mode. And so that feeds back into channel 4, and that allows me to kind of challenge everything going on, but have it be in sync. As everything's based on everything in this system. If I invert it or whatever, then it still stays in time with everything, if there is time for what I'm doing. You can find my music at oriclear.bandcamp.com, fathomthevoid.bandcamp.com, or kalidivostum at bandcamp.com.